Larissa's POV.
Even without feeling all over my under eyes, I could tell that they were swollen. It even took so much willpower to force myself to continue my chores and take care of Declan like nothing was happening in the first place. And it was getting tiring. Ever since that day, I'd taken to my bed at any opportunity one found. It was hurting too much, so much that it felt like a chainsaw gutting me out every day. I couldn't get the image of his expression that day out of my head. I hated that I thought of him so much. I hated that my happiness, however little, had begun to dwell on his own affirmations. Fuck, why did I have to care in the first place? He would never see me for who I was. He would never love me. I was merely here to take care of his son as he saw fit. He must think my feelings are a plaything, TSK. Standing there, I felt stupid all over again. How could I have let this happen once again? I wanted to bring myself to reject him once and for all. I couldn't even bring myself to do that. I hadn't seen him ever since that day. Frankly, I didn't fancy seeing him. I didn't want to have to face him. Perhaps it was best the way it was. I could get over it a lot easier. I felt a small pang in my chest yet again, the wave of this one hitting harder than they have in the last few days. Hey, Larissa, are you sure you're fine? A calm, feminine voice pulled me out of my trance-like state and I flinched, spinning around sharply and dropped the dish in my hands to the ground. Ouch! I jumped, startled, and squatted quickly to gather the shards that had scattered on the ground. Instead, I pricked one finger on a shard of broken dish, whimpering at the sensation. It was just about as painful as a needle-point injury, inconspicuous, but just as painful. The figure in the kitchen with me who gasped was Gwen, whose lips were parted in a mix of surprise and irritation, and muttering a string of barely audible curses as her glances shifted from me to the mess on the ground, and back to me. I told you before, don't do the dishes if you're not feeling well. You always break them. She yelled again while clicking her tongue, the expected vial replaced with concern. She stared at me with soft eyes, crouching down to pick up one of the larger shards before waving it at my face. Are you sure you're fine? I wasn't going to say this, but you've been spacing out quite a lot. I am fine. I muttered back unconvincingly, struggling to wipe off the excesses of dishwashing liquid from my hands and completely ignoring the pain in my fingers. I rose to my feet and she mirrored my action, staring at me with the most concern. Now that's a lie and you know it. I don't want to bug you, but did something happen to you? You know you can tell me. She spoke softly again after running a hand through her hair that she had let down today. Even seeing her let down her now auburn hair reminded me of the way he'd pulled away the elastic band in my hair that day. He didn't even know how effort it took to keep my hair down that day. Wait, why was I even thinking about him again now? Gwen noticed the discomfort in my expression and let out a sigh in what I assumed was defeat before walking to the other end of the kitchen to fetch a broom. She came back in no time, sparing me a displeased glance before nudging me with her elbows. Just go to your room, I'll clean this mess up. Her voice carried a tone of instruction and I had no choice but to comply. I didn't want to remain here. More than anything, I wanted to return to my room and gather my wages and probably spend it on getting some befitting clothes that didn't scream depressed as I was. I had thought of getting a phone once, but what was the point? I had no one left in the world to reach out to. I was locked up with my own problems, and no one gave a fuck about it. I nodded at that and forced a smile to assure her that I was fine before walking out of the kitchen. As I did, I glanced at the dining table, remembering all the times I'd served him and Declan breakfast. The image was vivid as if it was happening in reality, but I knew I was just hallucinating. They'd been happening recently. I saw him everywhere when I didn't want to. I saw him when I closed my eyes, even in my lucid dreams, and it frustrated me to no end. I sighed again and started for the stairs, when I saw him again walking down the stairs with a t-shirt that clung to his torso for dear life, and marching sweatpants. I blinked at him twice, but he remained there with his hands thrust deep in his pockets. He was looking straight ahead, avoiding my gaze at all costs. It was weird, every time I saw him, he was staring at my soul. But today, he was looking at something else. I rolled my eyes at that, patting at my hair before letting out another sigh. What the fuck are you looking at? I snapped. What the fuck are you looking at? He snapped back with almost bewildered eyes. Startled, I flinched and took small steps backwards, pinching my cheeks so hard that I was sure they would bruise. I wasn't hallucinating. He was really there on the staircase, staring at my mortified form with one raised brow. Only then did I feel a heavy wave of embarrassment hit me hard, as well as a million other feelings I couldn't describe. There was hurt, anger, fear, and a feeling that my chest was going to explode all at once. Slacking off? He continued tauntingly, forcing my eyes back up from where they had wandered to. He looked away almost immediately before clearing his throat harshly, looking at me with stern eyes. I didn't respond, instead I looked away again. Clean the living room. Now. My guests would be here in a few minutes, and I don't want them telling me how murky the whole place is because a certain housekeeper refused to do her job. He finished harshly, not sparing any more glances before pushing past me to his study. I stood there numbly for a minute, finally feeling the pain of 1,000 needles pricking at my heart course through my veins. I didn't imagine that seeing him after that day would hurt so much. I had half expected him to say something. Anything, if it would numb the way I felt. Instead, he just dished out his orders and left like that. I nodded to thin air, struggling to blink back the tears that had begun to brim in my eyes. It hurt so much, and I hated it. Wiping back at the tear in my eyes, I turned around only to see Gwen looking at me pitifully. Even that hurt all the more.
Cadence POV.
As soon as I'd thrown the door to the study open, I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. I didn't imagine that I'd see her so soon after that evening. Peter was agitated seeing her too, and I was so tempted to slap him into sanity. This was all his fault, if only he hadn't let the mating season get to him. Don't blame me for your own errors, Caden. You were the one who called Amaya that day.
Can you fucking shut up for a damn minute?
I snapped back, walking briskly to my desk before plopping onto the chair. I ran a hand through my hair in futile attempts to pull my shit together, but it didn't work. Annoyed and frustrated, I picked up a file from the desk. But even that appeared to be splattered black ink on white paper. The words were all jumbled, and I slammed it back onto the desk. I rose from my seat again, walking to the miniature bar in the study. I stopped at the bar, grabbing a bottle of whiskey from the counter when I halted my movement. Her scent from the last time still lingered all over the bar. Something about it was comforting as much as it bothered me. Why couldn't I get her out of my mind? She was everywhere I went and it drove me crazy. Even her words from that night echoed in my head, forcing me to ditch the wine and return to my seat. Caden, you're screwed big time. No matter how long it takes you to admit it.
Cadence POV.
My discomfort worked its way right into nighttime. I stood in the shower, loving the delicious tingles that traveled down my spine from the odd temperature of the water. Any other person would have complained that the water was cold enough to give frostbites in spring, but I thought otherwise. It was currently the only thing that could take me away from the bugging insanity that had become Larissa. I finally turned off the shower head, swiping off the white towel from the curtains before wrapping it around my torso. I climbed out of the shower, shaking my head slowly to rid my hair of excess water before walking back into my room. I threw some comfortable clothes on and turned in the direction of my bed, but my eyes lingered on the spot she'd laid that evening she'd yelled at me. I couldn't read what her eyes pleaded that day, but her words were just as gut-wrenching. Closing my eyes, I let out a sigh and plopped onto the bed and opened my eyes again to stare at the ceilings. I had my hands behind my head, supporting its weight as I let my mind wander far. No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't bring myself to answer any of the questions she'd asked. Why I said one thing and did another, why I was playing with her feelings, I didn't know. I didn't want to care about her feelings, I wanted them to have nothing on me. Peter had called it denial, and it pissed me off to no end. She'd said she wasn't Amaya, but it didn't stop her from being a fucking cheat too. I still didn't want a mate that had cheated on the man she was married to. But fuck it, I couldn't lie anymore that she didn't do things to me. She drove me insane every time I saw her, her body and her scent were everything. But more than that was her occasional smile when she saw me, even though I was certain that it had finally gone up in flames. I hadn't realized it, but seeing her happy to see me made my heart swell. The way she took good care of Declan like he was her own son, something Amaya couldn't do, her stealthy glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. I'd heard from my guards her service to the pack members on my mission. and the fact that I was beginning to trip for her sweetness irritated me. I hated that she was working her way to my heart, one I've diligently guarded since that bitch left me. I hated myself even more for feeling this way in the first place. I was actively setting myself up for another heartbreak, and I didn't want that in the slightest. You can't go on like this, Caden. Make up your mind once and for all. Admit that you want her in more ways than just her body. It won't kill you to admit that seeing her hurts you as well. Stop being a fucking chicken. I swear I would knock off your teeth, Peter. Do what you want, he taunted back as I struggled to force myself to sleep. We're the same person, you'll get hurt worse. Asterisk. It had been a full week since I'd spoken to Larissa. I didn't know if she was intentionally avoiding me, but if she was doing a fucking great job at it. The last time I'd seen her, she was playing with some flowers with Declan in the garden. They looked happy, and I was content just seeing them from afar. I didn't trust my impulsive tendencies not to snap at her if I did see her up close. I shifted my attention to the small crowd in the living room where I sat on an armchair. Hunter and the Gemini had just arrived a few minutes ago, and the twins were chattering about something I didn't care enough to pay attention to. Hunter, on the other hand, was transfixed on his laptop, typing away like it was the most important thing in the world. I fucking mean it. What do you think? Should I take her home permanently? Jacob cackled out, his annoyingly high-pitched voice rising octave as he spun around to look at me. There were tingles in his eyes, as well as a sly smirk and a small chuckle from his brother. My lord, do you mind? I was talking about this crazy good Omega I had last night. I want to seek your permission to take her home with me. And how is that relevant to what we came here to discuss, Jacob? I questioned back irritably, earning a soft chuckle from his lips. I told you before, I don't care about your sexual shenanigans. Take your fucks to your house as long as they consent. I can see that your injuries healed up pretty nicely. He rose a brow at that, nudging his twin gently before chuckling. Of course, my lord. Thank you. So what about you? Been good?
We're not friends.
I know, my lord, he drawled with mischievous eyes, twirling his free hand in the air. But I do think that you need a break from all of the shenanigans. You've been busy an awful lot. I'm pretty sure your son misses you. It was my turn to cock a brow. What did it matter to him if my son missed me or not? It wasn't in his place to give me any advice. The man couldn't keep it in his pants even at gunpoint.
He has a nanny, so save it.
I begged to agree with him. Hunter piped finally, shifting his attention from the screen in front of him. You may have forgotten, but you usually go on a short vacation at this time of the year. You're especially stressed out recently, so I agree with Jacob on this, my lord. I shifted my attention to him, feeling a frown creep up on my face. I didn't need a vacation because I didn't trust any of the bigoted idiots who called themselves my board of directors to keep the business afloat for even a day, let alone a full month. They would plunge the company into debt and try to abscond with the money my father and I had worked so hard to make. As if he could read my mind, Hunter cleared his throat again and spoke up. I am certain that your fears would not see the light of day, my lord. Jackson and I are there to supervise and make sure everything goes according to yearly plans. So you can take some time off and spend it with Declan. No. I said again, glaring now and rising to my feet. What the fuck is wrong with all of you? There were brief glance exchanges between the three men in the living room who'd suddenly gone quiet. Good. They were testing my patience and leniency in the first place. I started walking away to my study, ignoring their discussion that had erupted in hushed tones. I threw the doors to the study open and stomped through, plopping myself onto the seat. Maybe they were right, I started thinking to myself as my thoughts wandered to Larissa yet again. Perhaps I could use the vacation, maybe even bring her along to take care of Declan on the trip. A subconscious smile crept up on my lips at the thought. I was quick to catch myself, however, mentally facepalming at my actions. She would be adamant and say no, I could already guess. But she loved Declan too much to refuse me. Smiling again, I let myself twirl in the executive chair before halting to pick up the documents on the desk. Night met me soon enough and I stretched in my seat, trying to soothe my muscles that had grown sore from sitting in one position for so long. I leaned backwards, letting out a small yawn at that. Hunter and the Gemini must have left now, since the skies now mimicked the color of ultramarine. Sighing again, I finally rose to my feet and started for the doors to the study. I dragged myself out and towards the stairs, forcing my feet to climb through. I soon reached the top of the stairs, and my eyes quickly caught onto Larissa, who was just stepping out of Declan's room. She whispered something as she walked out before walking to her door. I smiled again subconsciously, catching myself quickly before she would shut her door. She walked into her room with the door half open before dragging her feet to where her closet stood. She didn't notice me resting by the door frame until she turned around, and she jumped backwards with a loud shriek that was akin to that of a frightened duck. I flinched in mild surprise, collecting myself together quickly before falling into a scowl. "The fuck? Did you see a ghost?" I half snapped at her, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she picked up her steps towards the door with widened eyes. And no. Anyways, that's not important. I continued, raising an intimidating brow, and she looked away. Not out of fear, she didn't even try to hide the distaste on her face. "How's Declan? Why don't you check on him once?" She questioned back without looking at me, and I hissed at her sudden attack. This wasn't what I came here for. She had some nerve. I didn't ever tolerate people speaking to me the way she always did. But I always couldn't bring myself to tear her neck in two. I sighed instead, raking a hand through my hair before glancing at her again. "I want you to accompany Declan and I on a vacation next week." "No." I cocked a brow at her response as she slowly brought her eyes to look at me. They were empty, contrary to how they'd looked at me the last time. She had her arms behind her as she spoke. "No," she repeated, a little less subdued. "I'm not your plaything. You shouldn't be playing with my feelings like that. Why would you ask me to follow you on a vacation? Get your head straight." I returned as coolly as I could muster, glaring back at her response. "I'm asking you to accompany me because of my son. Don't forget that you're his nanny above everything else. This has nothing to do with anybody's feelings." She was looking back at me now with confusion in her eyes. "But you have other maids that can." "It's an order," I hissed out impatiently, leaning into her face that flinched back at the proximity. Her reactions were always amusing, but for a second, I found myself wondering if she would decline my instructions. Refusal isn't even an option.
Larissa's POV.
I picked up the last piece of clothing from Declan's bed while the toddler sat quietly by the small table in his room, playing with his toy soldiers he'd introduced me to once. He looked engrossed in what he was doing, which was a good thing because I wasn't anywhere near the mood to chase him around for him to stay put. His father was literally forcing me to have to be in the same space as them both. Declan, I could tolerate because the toddler had grown to be a part of me. His standoffish father, not so much. How insensitive could he be? I was only going there because of Declan. If not, I'd rather face death 1,000 times than be locked away somewhere with his father. Besides, the boy was already dressed up and eager to go with me. Folding up the onesie in my hands, I tossed it into the yellow duffel bag that sat with me in the bed and zipped it up before patting off a small speck of dust that had found its way onto the bag. "Declan dear, come here," I called out after I had finished, beckoning on him gently. He glanced at me for a second before rising to his feet, gathering his favorite soldier and some of his wooden knives before taking quick steps to where I sat. He soon climbed onto my laps while I helped pull him up. "Issa, here," he said. I returned, handing me one of his knives. I chuckled at his cuteness before taking it from him. He continued to play with his toys while I let my mind wander before there was a soft rap at the slightly ajar door. I turned towards the door, quickly catching the familiar auburn hair that was let down. "Hey there, can I come in?" "Do you need to ask me that?" I cackled in return at Gwen's absurd request, earning a laugh from her as she took quick strides inside. "You never know. Declan's so fond of you now, I have to ask for both of your permissions to see any of you." She teased back, taking a seat beside me. She tapped at the toddler's hair, ruffling it a little and earning a string of giggles from him. She smiled at that before shifting her attention to me. "Hey, are you sure you'll be okay? You don't have to go if you don't want to." She started softly, even her eyes had grown the softest I'd seen them in a long time. I shook my head at that, forcing a tight-lipped smile. The last thing I wanted to do now was overthink and hate myself for being in a position where I had to be obedient to him. Even if I didn't want to, you think he'd let me be? She sighed out, her shoulders slumping into what I believed was defeat before she nodded. Fair enough then. There was another knock on the door that pulled my attention from Gwen and to the figure standing there. It was a guard, another one of the obnoxious-looking ones who had his hands to his back as though he was there to march me to prison. The Alpha is calling for you and his son. He spoke gruffly with no other expression on his face. I sighed at that, tapping at the toddler before pulling him up. He winced but said nothing, instead clinging to me with one hand and to his knives with the other. Gwen rose to her feet, passing me the yellow duffel bag she had picked up from the bed and giving me a knowing smile. You'll be fine, she muttered, and I forced a small chuckle at that. Would I really be fine? Don't keep him waiting. The guard spoke again, this time impatiently before turning on his heels and stomping away. I let out a sigh before picking up my own bag that was filled with basic amenities, essentially clothes. Smiling at Gwen one last time, I made my way out of Declan's room and down the stairs with heavy steps till I reached the front doors that were always thrown wide open. I glanced around, gripping onto both bags tightly in one hand and finally walked out of door. Only to meet him standing there with a small frown plastered on his forehead. His appearance caught me off guard. He was standing beside a black truck in a simple white t-shirt and a pair of dark jeans. I could see his arm muscles strain against the fabric of the shirt and how they appeared sweetly sun-kissed. He had a pair of sunglasses in his tousled hair, a vast contrast with his work appearance that consisted of fitting suits and perfect gelled hair. I mentally face-bombed when Elle met his eyes and looked away immediately. They were empty, just like his soul. Get inside, we don't have all day, he said after clearing his throat awkwardly and opened the door to the truck. He quickly pulled the bags from my hand, making me gasp in surprise before letting go. He didn't even spare me a glance as he made his way to the back of the truck. I could care less about whatever the hell it was that he was doing, however. Pulling Declan slowly, I walked to the passenger's seat and got in. I picked him back up and placed him on my laps, biting back a chuckle when he reached for the steering wheel and mumbled a "wee." The drive was eerily quiet. What made it so much worse was that I had no idea where we were even going. What was his idea of a vacation? Hunting in the woods like the day I met him? I couldn't figure it out. The roads were smooth yet awfully unfamiliar, plunging me into deeper wonder. The only words that were spoken throughout were either exchanged between Declan and I, or Declan and his father. A lot of it were incomprehensible words and beams of excitement, and I was happy for that. The air would otherwise have been so thick that I could cut through it with a knife. I caught myself stealing glances at him, I couldn't help it. I hated him, and I hated the fact that he could just sit there looking like that. He drove until he made a turn and the truck jerked, forcing me out of my daze and gripped Declan's shoulders in shock. The driver, the cocky narcissist, broke a tiny smile instead, swerving the car into a road path in an unfamiliar forest. He drove till we arrived at a black gate that was shut and he pulled up. Without a word, he alighted the truck, leaving me room to admire the intricacies of the gate's architecture. There were tree vines made out of metal that intertwined with themselves in a pretty fashion until they reached the sharp ridges of the tall gate. I found myself wondering what the blacksmith had thought when crafting this gate. No doubt that it was in line with the Alpha's persona, though awful. I heard the gate rattle and creak and be pulled open to reveal a massive double-deck cabin almost half the size of the mansion. Without thinking, I pushed the door to the truck open and alighted, putting Declan down. I let him run into the compound, chucking lightly when he picked up his small steps and was reaching for what I thought was the front door. I followed him through the gates to where the Alpha was standing by a fountain that was akin to the one at the mansion. Declan had run to my sides again, glancing at the fountain before reaching to scoop out some water. "Declan, darling." I called out with reprimand and crouched to his height, smiling nonetheless. "Don't do that. The water would get dirty, don't you think?" "Let him." The Alpha finally spoke up, and I looked up to see him with a half-smile plastered on his face. I cleared my throat at that and rose to my feet, watching him walk to where the front door stood. Tapping at the toddler, we followed him through the door to meet a pleasant surprise. I knew that the Alpha was a sucker for a blend of architectural designs, but the cabin interior screamed family cottage. The door opened to a cozy living room painted with warm shades of brown and beige. There was a single couch sitting opposite a fireplace, the same soft beige as the drapes. The ceilings were not very high, compared to the mansion. Neither were there chandeliers hanging from every corner. Instead, the living room was lit with lights embedded in the ceilings. I glanced around to see a framed picture of Declan and the one who'd caused me to hurt so much by the windowpane just against the fireplace. He was smiling widely, holding the then baby in his arms. Upon a closer look, I could see manicured fingers holding Declan also, whose body had been cut away. That must have been his wife. It was a painful reminder. Amaya. I shook my head to snap myself out of my thoughts. I shouldn't have agreed to come here. I should have stayed back. Larissa? Larissa! Ha! I whipped up my head quickly to see him staring down at me. He had a brow cocked in question, but I said nothing. Instead picked Declan up and moved to the couch, setting him down before running a hand through his fluffy hair. I rose to my feet again, turning to meet his father. I need some air. I croaked out, pushing some of the hair that had unsatisfactorily clung to the beads of sweat on my face. I saw his eyes shift and then go blank again, but I walked out before he could say anything. I didn't want to hear it to begin with. It was bad enough that he practically forced me to be here. The best he could do was to let me be. I continued into the woods, unknowingly letting out a small smile. I could really use this to clear my head. I liked the smell of the trees and grasses here, something about it made me at peace with my troubled soul. Without thinking, I plopped down beside one of the tall trees and closed my eyes, letting myself relish in my own thoughts. Suddenly, I felt the hairs at the back of my neck raise and I shot off the ground at the sudden queasy feeling. Almost immediately, I could hear some rustling in the trees and my blood ran cold at that. Was there an animal in these woods? I couldn't fight. Who's there? I called out weakly, making a small fist. The shuffling worsened, making me gulp harshly. Who's there? There was a sharp thud behind me, bringing an end to the shuffling. If fear was a person, in that instant it had killed me. My first instinct was to speed back to the cabin. Anything would be better than staying here with the uncertain. But I couldn't will my feet to move. I heard a light cackle and forced myself to turn on my heels. Ever so slowly, I spun around to come face to face with the most sinister pair of eyes I'd ever seen, perhaps next to Stefan's. The figure dressed in cargo pants and combat boots had a bow slung across his broad torso, and both arms swung behind his back. He cracked a smile that contrasted the look in his eyes, yet complemented it somehow. His hair the shade of platinum gray was disheveled and framed his face, enhancing his dangerous appearance by 1,000 notches. "Hey there, Larissa, was it?" he drawled, clucking his tongue before letting out a smirk. "How do you know my name?" "Pardon my manners, love. The name's Dolph. Last time we met, Caden was going to chew my head off. Too bad your Prince Charming isn't here, isn't it?" he continued, inching closer to me. Even as I took several steps back to put some space between us. I could feel my heart beating out of my chest in frantic fashion. It came back all too quickly. That day at the study, he was the one present with Hunter and Caden. He looked like a whore that day. Today might just be the dangerous side of him I'd never wished to see. Gripping the hem of my dress tightly, I gulped while taking several steps backwards. He took a step for every step I took back, and I could see myself breaking into a cold sweat. I needed to get out of there, and I needed to get out fast. I looked around and decided to make a run for it. I wouldn't stay here until my death met me. I looked up to meet his amused eyes and dashed away, but the sounds of shuffling startled me again. I couldn't see them, but I could hear several figures jump down from the trees behind me. My whole body was shaking at this point. Slowly, I looked around only to realize that I was surrounded. And the sounds of familiar cackling drew me back to reality. I was in serious trouble now. And the only thing that I could think of was Declan. I couldn't bear to leave him alone just like that. I couldn't bear to leave his father just like that either. "You're surrounded, honey. Don't make this any more difficult for yourself. Caden doesn't even have to know a thing that'll happen here, he continued, closing the distance between us, and despite the terror that coursed through my veins, I wasn't about to give in to his scheme. "Fuck you!" I spat back and turned sharply on my heels when he grabbed my arm and pulled it back, slapping me hard. "No! Fuck you, you bastard!" He growled angrily and slapped me again before yanking my hair and harshly pulling me towards a tree. The men who jumped down from the trees had gathered round to mock me while the blonde-haired man was in rage. He looked at me with death in his eyes and slapped me a third time before latching his lips onto my neck. And in that instant, I could do the only thing I could. "Please, I'm begging you. Don't let me down this time, help me this once again." "Caden,"